Cult mom Lori Vallow has been found guilty of murdering her 2 children and conspiring to kill her husband's former wife following a 5-week trial and nearly 4 years after she was catapulted to infamy. The 49-year-old was emotionless as the verdict was read out aloud in Boise, Idaho. Her defense team did not call a single witness, nor did they put forward any kind of explanation for how the children died. Lori Vallow's children, 7-year-old JJ and 16-year-old Tylee, vanished in September 2019. Their mother, Lori Vallow, newly in love with doomsday cult enthusiast Chad Daybell, avoided questions and evaded the authorities. She fled to Hawaii, refusing to tell the police where her children were or answering any kind of questions about not only her children but the vast web of death and deceit that seemed to engulf her family. Chad Daybell is facing similar charges. His trial was paused. I don't know the details as to why. Lori Vallow, who was found mentally competent to stand trial, now faces life in prison. Prosecutors previously took the death penalty off the table. Why? Don't know, nor do I approve. She's been found guilty of murdering her 7-year-old child JJ and 16-year-old Tylee. In my opinion, the death penalty absolutely should apply. It emerged after the verdict that she will be sent to Arizona following sentencing to be charged with conspiracy to murder her 4th husband, Charles Vallow. He was shot dead in July 2019 by Lori Vallow's brother, Alex Cox, who died 5 months later from natural causes. Lori Vallow was indicted by a grand jury in Phoenix, July 2021. The bizarre case drew nationwide interest in 2019 after the 2 children vanished. It took another 9 months for their bodies to be discovered in shallow graves in Chad Daybell's backyard. JJ had been suffocated with a plastic bag, while Tylee's corpse was so badly burned and dismembered that it is still not clear how she was killed. The state argued that Lori Vallow was motivated by money, power, and sex, and that she used all 3 of those things to achieve her twisted ends. Jurors heard that Lori Vallow and her husband Chad Daybell viewed Lori's children and Daybell's wife as obstacles to their romantic life that they had planned for themselves in Hawaii. So the pair, Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, according to the prosecution, viewed anyone standing in the way of their love, of their future life, as zombies, there to be killed. Which kind of reminds me of Chris Watts. I'm no expert on the Chris Watts case, and I'm not particularly familiar with the Lori Vallow case other than going through this one article a few days ago. But it does remind me, it seems reminiscent of Chris Watts. The current narrative in regards to Chris Watts, which may be the final narrative, but there is controversy, there's speculation of other things happening. But as far as I understand with Chris Watts, he fell in love with his mistress, I can't remember her name, and seemingly he took the life of his wife, Shanann, I believe, and his 2 children. One was called Bella. I can't remember the other girl's name. They were both girls, I think. He killed all 3 because they stood in the way of what he envisaged to be his new life with his new mistress. Some say that's not the correct story. Some say that perhaps the mother, Shanann, killed the 2 children and Chris Watts snapped and killed Shanann at that point. Others say that the mistress was somewhat involved. She denies any involvement. I don't want to dive into that too deeply. I'm just saying that this does seem reminiscent, that point there, that Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell were in an extramarital affair. Chad Daybell was married at the time, if I understand correctly, and for whatever bizarre reason, they were so romantically involved with each other, so believing of the importance of their relationship, that they felt justified in taking the life of anyone that they felt stood in the way, including Lori Vallow's own 2 children and Chad Daybell's wife. Going back to the article, after JJ and Tylee's disappearance, authorities started to looking at all of the deaths that were connected to the pair. Tammy Daybell was Chad's wife when he first met Lori and the mother of their children. She died suddenly in October 2019. Initially, her death was ruled as the result of natural causes. After attention turned to Lori and Chad, she was exhumed and re-examined. An autopsy showed that she had died of asphyxiation, the the same cause of death, which would later be determined for JJ. And that makes me wonder about Lori Vallow's brother. So we're told that Lori Vallow's fourth husband, Charles Vallow, was shot dead by Lori Vallow's brother, Alex Cox, and then Alex Cox died 5 months later from natural causes. Is it possible that he too was murdered by Lori Vallow, perhaps by Chad Daybell? Is that possible? I would think so. I would think that is a possibility. Lori Vallow was eventually arrested in Hawaii February 2020, 5 months after JJ and Tylee were last seen alive. The children would not be found for another 4 months. Jurors heard that the only remains of Tylee were charred remains, very minimal remains. She was burnt beyond any kinds of recognition, as far as I understand. JJ's body was wrapped in trash bags and duct tape, the tape binding his arms in front of him and wrapping around his head. He had been suffocated inside a plastic bag. Gonna say a little prayer for both children. Terrible, terrible, terrible deaths, killed by their own mother. I mean, how horrific, how horrifying. As far as I understand, JJ was asphyxiated first, so strangled. And I'm gonna say this, and I'm sure you'll understand the intent that I mean, but I'm glad that his body was treated in this horrific way after he was killed, meaning not during his killing. Perhaps I've not articulated that perfectly, but I think you'll understand what I mean. I'm glad that he wasn't tortured. His body was subjected to being discarded in this way. I'm glad that didn't happen whilst he was alive. I certainly hope that's not the case. We're told that the couple planned to use life insurance money from Tammy Daybell's death, and that Lori Vallow kept collecting and spending the children's social security and benefits after they died. So a financial aspect as part of the motive for the killings, but ultimately because they wanted to live their new life, their new wonderful romantic life in Hawaii. A fairy tale dream for them both, valuable enough, important enough to justify killing multiple people: Lori Vallow's 2 children, JJ and Tylee, Chad Daybell's wife, Tammy, and potentially others, potentially Lori Vallow's brother. So it's terrible. So I'm going to wrap up at this point. Thank you for listening. If you've reached this point, you're a star. Please do consider joining my memberships, and take care.